healthcare topics you need and wellness tips you deserve, all straight from the doctors themselves. Maayong Adlaw, Cebu. I'm Priya Padilla-Roleda from CDN Digital, and together with the hospital at Maayo, and this is Maayong Adlaw Doc. Last week's episode, we talked about basic skincare and how important it is to take care of our skin. For this week's episode, we're going to continue that discussion. But before we head over to that, let's watch this video about the Hospital at Maayo Aesthetic Institute. The Hospital at Maayo Aesthetic Institute prides itself on providing the most advanced surgical, non-surgical, and cosmetic procedures for all ages and all skin types. Their internationally trained surgeons and staff are committed to help you achieve your desired aesthetic appearance from head to toe. The Hospital at Maayo Aesthetic Institute is looking forward to addressing your medical, surgical, and cosmetic needs at the premise of their private and luxe setting. Their services include dermatology, plastic surgery, aesthetic, and cosmetic treatments for the face and body. So if you're planning to get treatments for your body and face, head over today to the Hospital at Maayo and consult with their board-certified dermatologists to evaluate your skin. Their Aesthetic Institute also offers lasers and other anti-aging procedures like botulinum toxin, skin tightening, and more to reverse any signs of aging. Now, for today's episode, we will be talking about a skincare tip that is often neglected and forgotten: sunscreen. As a tropical country, we have high level of sun exposure. We can get sun exposure occasionally for those who work outdoors, or recreationally for those who enjoy spending time outdoors at the beach, for example. Let's learn more about the importance of using sunscreen or sunblock from our guest doctor today. A fellow of the Philippine Dermatological Society, she obtained her medical degree from Cebu Institute of Medicine, graduating second in class ranking, and completed her training in dermatology from Jose R. Reyes Memorial Medical Center, where she served as the chief resident in her final year. Her interest in research led her to the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, where she completed her fellowship in cutaneous translational research. In addition to her private practice, she is an assistant professor at the Cebu Institute of Medicine, as well as the deputy editor for the Journal of the Philippine Dermatological Society. Let us all welcome our guest for this episode, Dr. Hester Gail Lim-Wisser. Hello, Dr. Hester. How are you?
Hello, Ms. Priya. Nice to see you again.
Yes, I'm actually really excited to be with you again today. So we're practically just picking up from where we left the last time. I remember you mentioned during the basic skincare episode that there are 3 basic important steps in taking care of one's skin, and that is to cleanse, moisturize, and sunscreen. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Yeah. So welcome to the Philippines. Look, I remember the last time I told you I don't put sunscreen. So now I have sunscreen.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Baby steps.
Okay, so since we are in the Philippines, there are only 2 seasons here actually, no? Is it rainy and sunny?
I say it's hot and hotter.
Correct. Yeah, we have the same brainwaves.
Yes.
It's hot and hotter. So let's talk about sunscreen here. How important is sunscreen, considering that we live in such a hot place like the Philippines?
Yeah, so being in such a tropical location, we get a lot of heavy sun exposure even when we don't need to. So last week we talked about getting it accidentally inside the car while driving. We can get it even when we're indoors through the window.
Yeah.
And so because the sun is quite strong here, it is very important to put on sunscreen because the sun can actually damage our skin. The sun can lead to aging. And the sun can also put us at risk for skin cancers. And of course, a concern for many Filipinos is the pigmentation that the sun also causes. So sunscreen is very, very necessary for us.
You mentioned aging. Aging, you meant, girl.
Favorite topic.
So when we say aging, what are these telltale signs that you're actually prematurely aging?
So what I like to tell my patients is, you can, when you're in the shower, the next time you're in the shower, look at the skin on your stomach or the skin on your back or even your butt. That way you can see, hala, this is skin that never or barely ever sees the light of day. And you'll notice the skin there is very different from the skin on your face. Now our face, we get freckles, we get pigmentation, and we get wrinkles much
Why
earlier.
are you describing me?
So I'm describing, changes in the skin over time. And we really see it, especially in people who get a lot of sun exposure. So there are even, photos online of a driver who is very fair skinned. They're more sensitive to sun exposure. And you could see half of the face getting exposure from that left window in the car was much more wrinkly compared to the side that didn't get as much exposure. And it just goes to show how strong the effect of sun is on your skin.
Yeah, you spoke also about pigmentation. Does that mean that even if you're still very young, you could already get skin pigmentation if you keep on playing under the sun?
Yeah, so usually for Asians, we don't get wrinkles as early as individuals who have very light skin. So we tend to get wrinkles maybe towards our 40s and 50s. But we age by pigmentation. So you might notice, ideally we want this beautiful all over, body tan when we go out in the sun.
I don't like that. I want to be like you.
Some people want a tan, but so now, everyone's embracing their skin color, which I love. But the concern with, a tan you get from sunlight is maybe down the road you'll start getting uneven pigmentation, which we call dyspigmentation. And it's very common in the Philippines. We have things like melasma, right, which we call becas. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, right? So we get these uneven spots over the face, and this is a result of this cumulative, meaning, how many trips you've taken to the beach over how many years. It shows up later on in life.
Trips, accumulative,
Yes.
so many trips to the beach. But in my case, I don't really go to the beach that often, but once I do, even if I stay under the sun for just like 5-10 minutes, I get so dark already right away, even if I put sunscreen. For me, there's no use to it. So does that really work?
So yes, there's benefits to sunscreen. And one of the things they always talk about is looking at the product labels, right? So remember last week, we talked about looking for the pH in our cleansers, the type of moisturizer. For sunscreen, you have to look at the SPF. The SPF will tell you how high or how big the degree of protection is against UVB. I like to say UVB is the bad one. That means it puts you at greater risk for skin cancer.
What's a good one?
There's actually no good one. Maybe UVC when you're cleaning something
So
to
what is it?
sterilize.
Bad or
your
baddest?
skin. Yes. And UVA is a little less bad in the sense that it can cause cancer down the road long term, not as strongly as UVB, but it also leads to lasting pigmentation. And that's what you're talking about, where you sort of get this tan, right, with sun exposure. So you have to look for a product that has high SPF. You have to look for a product that does have UVA protection as well. But that being said, some people really are more sensitive to tanning. And Filipinos were really in the middle of that skin color chart. There's people who are very fair skin, like Caucasians, people who are darker skin, like African Americans, and then kita were in the middle. That means we're very prone to really developing this uneven pigmentation.
Well, I have a question regarding colors. Like there's white people, brown and dark. Who's more prone to getting skin diseases or bad exposure to sun when it comes to skin color?
Yeah, so actually there's a very specific type of grading system that dermatology nerds are familiar with, which we call Fitzpatrick skin typing. And it talks about how sensitive certain skin types, which really can be divided into different shades of skin color, are, and how sensitive they are to sun, how they react to sun. So usually those who are blonde haired, blue eyed, very fair skinned Caucasians, normally they're Fitzpatrick skin type 1 or 2, and then they do have the highest risk for developing certain skin cancers. Kita as Filipinos, I don't want us to make salig na, we have this intrinsic melanin, we're safe without.
So that's a protection in a way, the melanin.
Melanin protects in a way, but then when we overdo the sun exposure, again, pigmentation is going to be a problem, and we talk about uneven pigmentation as a problem. And still, we can still develop skin cancers even. So it doesn't mean that just because we have some pigmentation in our skin, we're completely safe.
The melanin you mentioned, okay, since we already have our own inherent protection, okay, does that mean that we don't need a very high SPF when you use sunscreen?
So there's a general recommendation for SPFs. So you have for the American Academy of Dermatology, the recommendation is an SPF of at least 30. Now in the Philippines, even though we have a bit more inherent melanin, which gives us a little bit, of a leg up compared to those who have very little, it doesn't mean we still don't get sunburn. In fact, any type of sunburn is indicative of DNA damage. And in fact, it can also, even getting a tan from the beach also means that our skin had to respond to this damage from the sun. So kita, we're so happy, like, oh, I got a little bit red, I'm so happy I got a sunburn, but we're actually celebrating bad things happening.
I can't relate to that because I really don't like it.
Me too. I think as locals, I talk to my friends abroad, they're like, why don't you love the beach? You're so near. And as a local, I hate it. Sorry.
At a very young age, I got already like very dry, wrinkly skin because I really love playing under the sun. So I think that's why I really don't like staying under the sun. I get dark really fast. Okay, but we know that sun is good. Can you remind us all what are the benefits of also being under the sun every now and then?
Yeah, I mean the sun can be good. So I don't want to come here and talk about this is awful for you. I mean the sun does have benefits. So of course, many of us are familiar with the fact that we can produce vitamin D through sun exposure. And I think this became very popular in the pandemic. Everyone was saying like, I would sunbathe just to get vitamin D. So it does help that effect, but I also want to remind the audience, we can get vitamin D through a diet, through supplementation as well. And at least in those forms, we're not worried about sunburn. And of course, the sun itself is a mood booster, So especially for maybe Filipinos living abroad, we'll notice during winter time, why am I so sad?
Yes.
And there's things like seasonal affective disorder, where the sun does affect the mood, and the lack of sun really just lowers the mood.
Okay, so there are different types of sunscreen, right? So how do we know which one is good for us? And what are these different types of sunscreens?
So sunscreens can be divided into two kinds. You have your physical sunscreen, and then you have your chemical sunscreen. So you're displaying that perfect form right now of UV protective, clothing, right? But with the physical sunscreens, these are maybe the more old school sunscreens. So this might be the one that you didn't like before, and like, it makes me feel so white. No, it's so sticky. Because physical sunscreens are usually comprised of minerals, this is your zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. So they really leave a white cast. So it's fine if you're very fair skinned, hindi man claro if your sunscreen is very white. But if you're fair skinned, you might not like no, I look like a ghost with this weird mask on my face. So that's where the chemical sunscreens.
I think that's the very reason also, Doc, why a lot of people don't like sunscreen, because they always come in this white thing, lotion type.
Yes.
When you put on your skin, you all of a sudden turn like a ghost.
Yes, yes, and even like when you take a photo, the flash from the camera, right?
Horrible.
It looks very bad. And so it's important because your physical sunscreens are like mirrors. So what they do is they reflect sun literally from your face. That's why it's white.
Again, that's physical.
Your chemical sunscreens naman, they actually absorb. So there's a chemical process going on. They absorb the sun, and then they usually emit infrared. So that way, they absorb it, they prevent the damage, but then they need to be applied earlier. Normally, we say put your sunscreen on 15 to 20 minutes before sun exposure. And the good thing about chemical sunscreens, they don't have that white cast. So you will see a lot on the market, mga sunscreens that are very, the texture feels very nice, or they're very gel-like. You don't see a hint of white in there. Those are the chemical sunscreens. But the downside lang, if you're sensitive, some people have allergies to the ingredient. So it's really testing things out, and again, seeing your skin type.
Did I hear this right? The chemical sunscreens are the new ones?
I would say they're newer. So they contain different chemicals from the classic physical sunscreen.
I see. But if you were to choose, which one would be better for you? You personally, for your skin type.
Me personally, I am a little bit sensitive, and I've actually developed allergies to some ingredients in chemical sunscreen. So I have to stick with the physical sunscreen, and very fortunate for me, it doesn't look too bad. But I always say with sunscreens, you really find a product you like, make sure it doesn't sting, and make sure you're willing to put it on, because another thing with sunscreens is you never put on
Okay, we never put on enough, so how much are we supposed to put?
So imagine yourself going to the beach. You're in a little tiny bathing suit. Normally, for
Yeah,
like
just
full
imagine.
body protection, let's say we're both at the beach, which both of us apparently
Can
did.
I just imagine you and not myself?
So, at the beach, the recommendation is you need a golf ball sized amount of sunscreen. So that's 1 ounce
For the
Right.
entire body.
for the whole body. So we never, very few of us, we'll say, I'm going to squeeze a little bit and then put in that. And that might be why you say, like, despite the sunscreen, I'm still getting a tan. Maybe we're not putting enough. So if the label says SPF 50, you need to put that golf ball for the whole body to truly get SPF 50 protection. For the face, we can say maybe 1/3 to 1/2 teaspoon for the face and neck. But
Alone.
that's still a lot, no? So
Yes.
imagine we use foundations that have
Yes.
SPF 15 and we'll salig. We'll say, we have a lot of protection. Okay, my foundation has an SPF 15, but are you willing to put half a teaspoon of your foundation on your face and neck? So that's why I do like standalone products, sunscreens, because some multitasking agents might not be enough. Even a moisturizer, it's too sticky if you put so much, right?
Okay. So you mean to say that when you put on your skin to have enough, might as well put a little bit of sunscreen, and then on top of that would be your foundation. Like that?
Yes. So put on a sunscreen.
Slow.
30 to 50, SPF 30 to 50. If you're sensitive, you're prone to pigmentation, freckles, things like that, you might want to stick with 50 or even higher pa, no? Because
I saw 100. Is that okay?
yes. So the general recommendation is SPF 50 prevents like more than 99% of the sun or the UV rays from hitting the skin. But the thing is, we put too little of it on. So that's the only benefit of higher SPFs na even though, what's above 99%, diba? Gamay na lang kaayo, but that's a benefit of an SPF 100 plus is that because we're not putting on enough of it, maybe you'll end up with an SPF 30 or 50 because you put a little bit of it.
Okay. I'm curious about, yes, we put sunscreen and we protect our skin from aging and stuff like that, but the tanning, it's still there. How does that work? Why is it like that? Like, yes, I notice if I put a lot, okay, it doesn't really dry, it doesn't feel bad. It's okay. It's just that it tanned a bit.
Yes.
Okay, so are sunscreens supposed to protect you from tanning too, or not really?
There are some sunscreens that have a very high level of UVA protection, and that's the one I said is more likely to cause pigmentation for us. So you might want to look at the label again. Usually for UV, it's going to be PA, and then they'll have like plus. So sort of the higher it is, the stronger the protection, the more it'll protect you from tanning.
So let's get this cleared up. What are we supposed to look for? UVA, UVB, what?
Yes, so we want to look for an SPF. That means it's a UVB protection, 30 and up. We want to look for PA. That's a UVA protection, but then in different countries it might be labeled differently. Ideally, you might want to look for water resistant as well, because normally
Sweat.
we're using sunscreen somewhere we tend to sweat, right? At the beach or outdoors.
And then another question: when should we put sunscreen on? Like, of course, we're going out, but like, how long should we wait to go out after we put our sunscreen?
Yeah, so I like to put sunscreen on first thing in the morning. We talked about the 3 steps, right? So after you cleanse, moisturize, you put on your sunscreen. You can always put on like foundation, etc. on top of that. But I like to put it on before going out. If it's a chemical sunscreen, you'll want to give it a bit of time. So maybe 15 to 20 minutes before heading out, you put on your chemical sunscreen. Physical sunscreens are a little less sticky, but generally it's a good habit to put it on a few minutes before.
I still have to catch up between the physical and chemical. My head is still spinning over that. But
So
I'm just gonna read the script again.
physical sunscreens are mirrors, they're shields, they're reflective.
Okay.
They reflect UV away, and then your chemical sunscreens are sponges. They absorb.
Right. Thank you for being patient with me.
No, it's such a common question because again, we have so much in the market, and it's always confusing.
We usually put sunscreen when we want to go out, expose ourselves to the sun. But question: if you are just at home the whole day, almost every day, because nowadays work at home is very in already, no?
Yes.
So do we still need to use sunscreen?
So I would say if you are in a windowless cave, maybe we don't need, like, you know, if you're like in your own work cave, there's no windows at all, then maybe that's where we don't really need much of sunscreen. But the thing is, most of us will work near a window. Most of our houses, we will get some degree of sun going through. And we talked about how glass, last week I think, we talked about how glass really only prevents UVB from going through, but we can still get the rays that cause pigmentation and aging. So I would say if you are sun sensitive, if you're worried about pigmentation, definitely consider using a sunscreen indoors, because especially if you're using anti-acne medications, we talked about retinols last week,
Yes.
right? It makes you more sun sensitive, and so you're going to just need that extra layer of protection.
So does that mean that, I don't know, I heard some people and they suggested to put on sunscreen even during nighttime. Is that good or bad?
So for me, there is really no need to put on sunscreen at night, just because, you know, we lose the sun at night, so it's not truly necessary. I know there's a lot of stuff out there now about screen exposure, indoor lighting. And you know, this is a different type of light that we talk about. So we've been talking about UV, that's ultraviolet, A and B. But you know, the light that you can see with the naked eye, and which we're surrounded by right now, is visible light. So there's a lot of stuff in the science, the literature lately about visible light and how it can lead to pigmentation as well. So especially again, you know, in our skin types that we're super prone to pigmentation, we can be a little concerned about it, but there's very minimal emission coming from our screens. But that being said, we also get a lot of screen time.
Yes. So we still need sunscreen.
I would just say in the daytime,
Bedtime,
yes. Maybe we can worry about it.
Okay. Now, how long do we need to reapply sunscreens? Let's say you're not going to the beach. You're just working, but you're such an outdoorsy person. Okay, so how often do we need to reapply sunscreens to make it effective?
So for sunscreens to be effective, they need to be on your skin. But the skin is such a vibrant thing, right? We sweat, we secrete oils, we accumulate water and dust and so on. So if you are doing heavy activity, let's say you're outdoor hiking, for example, and you feel like you're sweating a lot, definitely your sunscreen does need to be reapplied every 2 hours. The same goes for the beach. You're dipping into the pool, you're stepping out, you might be losing the effect of the sunscreen. So it needs to be reapplied every 2 hours. But if you're working from home and you're putting on that sunscreen just to be safe because of, you know, the open windows and such, you can always just put it on once a day.
Okay. Are there any products that are bad to use together with sunscreen?
So I would say the products that we would be worried about would be products that shouldn't be put on in the daytime. Not necessarily because they don't work with the sunscreen, but because they don't work in the sun in general, like the retinols again. Also, retinols are inactivated commonly by sunlight, and that's why we prefer to put them on in the evenings. And there are also some products that make you more sensitive to sun, so like over-the-counter stuff, like glycolic acid, salicylic acid. They can make your skin a bit more sensitive to sun exposure. And so that's why it's always beneficial to maybe put these products on when you're not going to get too much sun exposure.
Okay, so not really reacting against sunscreen, right? It's just against the sun.
Yes.
So you don't really lose them together with sunscreen. Okay, any more important, something that you feel like you really need to tell people about sunscreen? You know, there are songs about sunscreen.
Really?
Yes.
I feel like I'm not a true dermatologist until I learned these songs.
No. There's this one song, very old one. I think, I don't know, probably we're a little girl when it became title is Sunscreen.
Oh, wow. I think I need to research this.
Okay, it's just, you know, everybody, like, it's a joke actually, right? What's the best advice you can give to people? Wear sunscreen, right?
Yeah.
So as a dermatologist, what is it that you feel like you really need? You can't, you know, emphasize enough telling people regarding sunscreen, the use of sunscreen.
Yeah, what I can't emphasize enough is I feel that we, especially as a society, we have such an obsession with, you know, lightening our skin. So I think there's two different factions because, as I said, there's a whole group out there really embracing, you know, Filipino skin colors, which is great. And then there's also a group where they really want to actively lighten the skin. But lightening is not effective unless you put on sun protection. So we'll have patients that they've, you know, spent so much money on procedures, lightening procedures, and then, you know, with a single day they forget the sunblock. Hala, you know, the pigmentation comes back. So the sun is such a strong stimulus for pigmentation. So sunscreen is so essential.
So I think, hearing what you just said, I think it's more important to put on sunscreen than lightening products, right? Because sunscreen really protects you. Lightening products, yes, they might work, but only if you also protect yourself, if you also use sunscreen. But without sunscreen, these lightening products are not going to work. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Yes.
So from now on, we should really use sunscreen.
Yes.
Yeah. It's okay to get rid of the lightening products. Let's embrace our Filipina colors and just really use sunscreen.
Yes, I really can't emphasize that enough. And again, we're so fortunate. There's so much on the market now. So we talked about chemical sunscreens. So just like what we talked about last week with moisturizers, you find a texture you like, right? So maybe if you want
Can
to
we repeat a little bit, Doc? How do we know which one is the right one for you? Chemical and physical.
Okay, so if you are sensitive, if you're prone to allergies, you might want to stick with a physical sunscreen. Children generally are recommended to also use physical sunscreens. And another form of physical protection is what you showed, long sleeves. There are garments that have UPF, which is also like SPF but for clothes. Hats, large shades, face masks, which is maybe one of the positives we get from the pandemic is, the sort of accidental sun protection. But for chemical sunscreens, if, for example, you don't want that white cast, so maybe for those of us who have darker skin types and we don't want super weird, with the white cast of a physical sunscreen, you can consider the chemical sunscreen. And if you want something that tends to be like much lighter weight, usually the chemical sunscreens tend to be a bit more. But there's a lot of advances again with physical sunscreens now too.
Last question regarding physical and chemical sunscreen. How could we tell whether this one is physical and this one is chemical by reading the labels?
So you look at the ingredients list, right? Usually for your physical sunscreens, you'll see things like zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. For chemical sunscreens, most of the American sunscreens, you're going to see things like benzones, avobenzones, oxybenzone. For European sunscreens or Japanese, you'll see methyl cinnamate. So these are like very specific ingredients, but you can always just take a look because most of sunscreens for babies will naturally be physical sunscreen.
Okay, so physical, oxide,
yes,
for chemical, zone, ozone.
Yes, oxybenzone, avobenzone, cinnamate. So it's a long list, but you can always double check. So again, this is maybe where Google might be
this
benefit.
time. This time, you're happy that there's such thing as Google.
Yes.
Of course, always go to your friendly neighborhood dermatologist. Okay, if you're unsure what sunscreen to use, might as well visit them. Okay, to be sure that you don't get irritated because again, it's not a one size fits all thing, right? Okay, so we always have to know which product best suits our skin type. Okay, last message to our viewers.
So the final message would be put on sunscreen, and going beyond that is putting on the right amount of sunscreen again. Look at the labels so that you're familiar with the products you're using. And I always say, especially to Cebuanos, don't be tihik for the sunblock. You actually have to be very generous with the amount you put because more is better.
Iligo na lang nato ang sunblock.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Okay, Doc, thank you very much. And this has been a very informative, and I'm sure a lot of you are interested or got interested with this topic because it's summer, right?
Yes.
So we have to learn how to protect ourselves and be responsible while you're frolicking under the sun. Be responsible and love yourself. Put sunscreen.
Yes, skincare is self-care.
Yes, thank you very much, Doc, and I hope to see you again next time.
Yes, thank you so much.
That's it for our second episode of Maayong Adlaw, Doc, Season 2. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for today's episode, and please share this episode also to your friends and family so that they may also learn from the things that we spoke about in this topic or in this episode, right? And from their promise of Maayo, which in Cebuano means be well, discover a new healthcare experience in Cebu at the Hospital at Maayo. I'm Priya Padilla-Roleda from CDN Digital. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Now, to know more about the Hospital at Maayo, head over to their Facebook page at the Hospital at Maayo or their website at www.thehospitalatmaayo.com or call these numbers below.